Chapter 21. Chapter 21. Lucian Poff. It was now close to the end of November, when suddenly I was woken up by a feeling in my guts. I sat up from the bed in the hotel room I was staying in and looked out the window. It was the middle of the night. I tried looking in a different direction, but my gut feeling was pointing me to the side. So whatever is going on is in that direction. I got up from bed and changed what I was wearing and opened the window. I jumped out from the second-story window and landed with a roll to stop my momentum. I used my shadow blink ability and started making my way towards where the feeling was strongest. Jump after jump I started making my way down from Emporia towards Petersburg. When I arrived I had to catch my breath due to the long distance I just traveled. I summoned my trusty old pal Larry and had him carry me on his shoulder, where I started to direct him to where my gut feelings were pointing to. I soon arrived near a two-story house where I just knew this was the place. As I got closer I could hear the voice of a little girl. "Please believe me. There's spiders everywhere. Annabeth, stop trying to scare your little brothers, it's doing more harm than good." The voice of an older woman replied, which was followed by the sound of the door closing. I made Larry lift me up towards the second-story window where I heard the voices and saw a little girl covering herself with a blanket trying to hide. From the corner numerous little spiders started appearing from around the corner of her room. Seeing this I decided to take action and make an impact for the first impression. I willed my shadow to slip through underneath the window and open the lock. Once it was opened I sat on the frame of the window and summoned my scythe, making it lean on me. "Pick. I see you could use some help," I said with a leg swaying side to side. Annabeth quickly took her off the cover and looked in my direction in shock. The shock on her face further increased when she saw me for some reason. She then noticed the spiders in the room about to attack her once again. She looked towards me and in a pleading voice asked, "You can see them too, right? Please help me." I just nodded my head and willed my shadow to turn into tendrils and start skewering them, wrapping around them, just killing them all together. "Arise," I said as about 156 small spiders came out from the shadows and got pulled into my own shadow. "Just who are you?" Annabeth asked in awe as she saw me dispose of them so quickly. I decided to play a prank on her as I let out a deep dramatic sigh. "You see, Annabeth, whenever a little kid dies and that little kid just so happens to be a demigod, they are assigned a Grim Reaper to escort them towards the underworld." Annabeth then looked frightened. "How do you know my name?" I put on a confused look and tilted my head. It would be weird if I didn't know the one I was assigned to, wouldn't it? It looked like she almost believed me before she put on a pondering expression. She grabbed her pillow and threw it in my direction. "Don't joke about that. I almost believed you," she said with a hint of relief in her voice. It looked like she figured it out. "I still want to see how far I can take this." I grabbed the pillow as it got close to me and started shaking my head. "How do you know I'm not telling the truth?" I asked this in a challenging tone. "For one, I don't remember dying," Annabeth angrily. Still in character, I just shook my head. "Of course you don't remember. The state of being dead is so shocking you sometimes don't even remember how it happened." Annabeth looked scared slightly before shaking her head and composing herself. She looked at me unamused, which just made me sigh, as expected of the daughter of Athena, I suppose. She then looked at me nervous as she asked, "But seriously, who are you and how do you know my name?" "Name's Lucian, Lucian Blackheart. As for how, I heard the woman here earlier call you." A look of realization and relief came over Annabeth. She then took the sheets away from her body and came over towards me. "Please get me out of here. I can't stand it anymore," said Annabeth, sounding angry. I looked at her with a raised brow as I asked, "And why would I do that? Nobody wants me here. They think I'm just a burden. They didn't even believe me when I told them about the spiders, and it's been 3 days already," she said as tears started forming in her eyes. My hands naturally went towards her sandy blonde hair, petting her head. "Fine, I'll take you with me, but no, it will be dangerous. We will likely encounter a lot of monsters on the way. Are you sure you're up for it?" Annabeth's expression turned serious and nodded her head. "I'll still be in danger if I just stay here, so it's better if I just leave. So take me away." "Okay, Rapunzel, relax a bit. You want to leave empty-handed?" Annabeth pouted slightly at the name calling but shook her head. "Get your bag ready then. I doubt you want to stay in the same clothes you're wearing all the time." Annabeth went into her closet and took out a small suitcase. She turned towards Lucian and gave him a thumbs up. "I'm ready, let's go." "Seriously? You had a suitcase ready?" I asked, a bit shocked at how ready she was. She nodded her head as she said, "I was planning on escaping later on tonight, but you appeared. I already have everything I will need. Annabeth picked up her suitcase and was about to throw it out the window, but I stopped her. Wait, give me that. She looked confused but still handed it to me. I just shook my head and I willed my shadow to swallow it whole. Whoa. How are you doing that? Where did it go? She asked in amazement and great wonder. I'm the son of Hades. The shadows and darkness are what I'm most good at. I stored them inside my own shadow, I explained. I see, so that's the creepy feeling I was getting from you. Rude. I said, giving her a side eyes. Sorry, she said with an awkward expression. I didn't mean it in a bad creepy, like a mysterious creepy vibe. It's hard to describe. It's like the darkness, like it's creepy but you can't help but want to know more about it. I started looking at her weirdly. What are you on? She just sighed. Just get me out of here already. I offered my hand to her, which she took with a smile. But as I did, the door to her room opened. Annabeth's stepmother was looking at us in shock. What are you doing? I pulled Annabeth close and jumped out the window, much to the stepmother's shock. Sorry, I'm kidnapping her now. I grabbed Annabeth in a princess carry and started shadow blinking away. Wait, stop. The stepmother's voice quickly faded behind us. Chapter 22. Chapter 22. Third person's Puff. Once Lucien made it a bit further away, he appeared on top of a rooftop. He let out a sigh of relief and put Annabeth down. Well, Rapunzel, it looks like we got you out your tower. Annabeth looked at Lucien in annoyance. Stop calling me that, I have name. Lucien gave her a teasing smirk. Really? Well, I wouldn't have known since you haven't introduced yourself. We already know each other's name. What's the point? She said, rolling her eyes. For one, it will be good manners, and two, we now have a chance to probably introduce ourselves, don't you think? I guess you do have a point. Annabeth sighed. I tried looking up if she knew who her mother was during this time and I couldn't find anything, so I'm going with the narrative that she does. She stood in front of Lucien and stretched out her hand. My name is Annabeth Chase, daughter of Athena. Nice to meet you. Lucien shook Annabeth's hand as he introduced himself once again. Lucien Blackheart, son of Hades. Pleasure. Wait, Lucien said after thinking about it and looking into her grey-colored eyes. He asked, you know who your godly parent is? Annabeth nodded her head as her expression turned a bit downcast. You see, I have this ability that once I hear something I can't unhear and I would remember it forever. I heard my dad talking to my mother when I was a baby, and that's how I came to know who she was. Lucien just started patting her head as Annabeth smiled to herself for a bit before swatting his hands away and looking at him a fake annoyance. Don't do that. Don't mess up my hair, she said as she started rearranging her hair. Now what? She asked once she was done, looking at Lucien for what to do next. Now we find a nice place to sleep since it's still the middle of the night. How are we going to do that if we don't have any money? I just have a couple of dollars I stole from my dad, which I didn't take much since I would feel bad, Annabeth asked, her expression never changing. Lucien just looked at her with an amused grin on his face. I'll give you some advice for the future. When you're dealing with the son of Hades, never assume he's poor. Lucien summoned a wad of cash from his shadow and started fanning himself with it. Annabeth snickered at that. Well, rich boy, what are you waiting for? Let's go find some place to sleep. Lucien just scoffed at the nickname she gave him before summoning Larry, which frightened Annabeth when she first saw him appear, which he then had to explain a bit of his powers. The next day Lucien woke up in a hotel room. He had to rent a room with 2 beds, due to Annabeth's fear of spiders coming. It took them a while, but they managed to find it. They even found one where they would be able to clean themselves. Lucien and Annabeth sat on their respective beds and started discussing their next course of action. You've been doing this for a while, so it's better if you call the shots, Annabeth said, sitting on her respective bed. Lucien didn't say anything and just pulled his bag from his shadow and started looking through it. What are you doing? Annabeth asked curiously. Lucien didn't say anything but pulled out 2 golden daggers inside their sheath. He tossed them to her. Here for you. What are these for? Annabeth asked as she took out the daggers from their sheath. She stood up from her bed and started weaving them around like a natural. She looked at Lucien with a deep sense of curiosity and waited for him to answer after teasing them out. Well, aren't you a natural, as expected of the daughter of the goddess of warfare? Wow, that was a lot of in one sentence. Anyways, those daggers are one I personally made. They are the very first pair of enchanted daggers I created, and now I'm handing it off to you. They are made from celestial bronze and they are highly effective against monsters. Now for what they're enchanted with. Lucien started to then explain what their enchantments were. making Annabeth look at the daggers in surprise. "And you're saying you made this? That's unbelievable," she said in wonder. Lucian just nodded and looked proud of himself. "How were you able to enchant it?" she asked, looking over the dagger in different positions and directions. "My mother was a witch. She taught me everything she knew," Lucian said with a small smile. Annabeth, hearing him, already got the hint and looked at Lucian in surprise once again, but 9 tons was different from last time. There was a hint of pity. "I'm sorry for your loss," she said solemnly. Which Lucian just shook his head. "Now don't worry about it. I'm sure my dad is watching over her." A look of realization hit Annabeth as she nodded her head. She then looked at the dagger and at Lucian with a questioning look. "Oh right, I'm going to train you to survive against monsters. And in different dangerous situations, although I'm going to be learning with you as well in some cases." Annabeth looked determined, but the hint of fear couldn't be hidden from her eyes. "I know you're scared, but sometimes you got to face your fears even when you don't want to. As you know what they say, what doesn't kill you makes you stronger." Lucian stored their belongings in his shadow. He turned towards Annabeth as he said, "But before that you're going to be fighting against my shadow so you can get you some fighting experience, even if they are minor." Annabeth looked relieved when Lucian said that. The last thing she ever wanted to do was to fight, but she knew she had to do it in order to grow stronger. So she grabbed the sheath of the daggers and put them at the side of her hips and slapped the side of both her cheeks, getting ready for battle. Lucian took a hold of Annabeth's shoulder and sank into his shadow as they both shadow traveled out of the hotel room. They appeared in a park, the park where Lucian previously fought the boar. Annabeth was slightly distorted from her first experience of shadow travel, so it took a while for her to get it together. When she did, Lucian summoned a Lamia and explained everything about it. Annabeth, hearing everything about it, paid close attention. She naturally got into a fighting position as if she had been trained, even though she hadn't. For Annabeth, everything was based on her instinct. And with a war cry she ran towards Lamia with her daggers ready. 1 second later, Annabeth was seen on the floor looking at the sky above, wondering if she should just run away from Lucian as well and escape it all. One tail flick was all it took for her to end up on the floor. Chapter 23. Chapter 23. Third person's Puff. 1 month later, Annabeth was seen holding 2 daggers while looking at the group of 3 impounders in front of her. Annabeth remembered what Lucian had taught her about them. They were shape-shifting female demons with 1 brass leg and 1 donkey leg. They were known for seducing travelers. "Look at that, sisters, a little snack for the road has appeared before us. I would have preferred if it was boy though. Enticing them is always fun. Don't be picky now, it's not every day one of them offers themselves to us." Annabeth didn't say anything when she heard them mocking them. She just ran towards them with her daggers. One of them ran towards her, extending their sharp claws with a feral smile showing her sharp teeth, while the other 2 followed closely behind. The first one swung her claws towards Annabeth, but she leaned back to dodge, while swinging her dagger towards the extended hand, cutting it off from its wrist, causing the impouser to scream in pain. While screaming, she takes a step back, leaving her 2 sisters to go into a flying kick towards Annabeth. Annabeth ducked and rolled underneath them. She spun around and threw her 2 daggers right on their backs when they landed, causing them to shriek in pain and turn to dust. "No!" The remaining impouser called out and ran towards Annabeth when she noticed she didn't have her weapons. She opened her mouth, showing her vampire fangs aimed for her neck to kill her and make her pay for what she did to her sisters. As she was about to sink her fangs onto Annabeth, she suddenly felt something sharp and cold penetrate her throat. "How?" was all she managed to say before turning into dust. Annabeth flicked her dagger, shaking off the dust, and let out a sigh of relief. Luckily they reappeared right on time. "Arise," Lucian said, suddenly appearing right next to Annabeth, dispelling his shadow cloak. The 3 impounders appeared in the form of shadows and bowed their heads before disappearing into his shadow. "No matter how many times I see it, it always freaks me out," Annabeth said, shaking her head. "You're just jealous that your demigod abilities aren't as awesome or as showy as mine are," Lucian, acting smug about his powers. "Oh please, I don't need strong abilities to be powerful like you. All I will ever need is right up here," Annabeth countered while tapping the side of her head with a smirk. "Wait, now that we're talking about abilities, I just realized that you don't summon ghosts or skeletons to fight for you like how I assume someone of your lineage would. Why is that?" Lucian just put his hands over his head and started walking ahead. "No reason," was all Lucian said as he continued walking. Annabeth jogged next to Lucian and narrowed her eyes in his direction. Lucian just turned his head away, which caused Annabeth to gain a surprise expression before it turned into a teasing one. "No way, you, The son of Hades, one of the big three, is afraid of ghosts and skeletons, Annabeth said, provoking Lucian, trying to see how right her words were. Lucian's ears then turned slightly red with his head still turned to the side, which caused Annabeth to start laughing. I was only guessing and trying to trick you. I didn't know I was actually right, ha 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 ha, she said in between her laughter. It's not funny. Lucian grumbled. You're right, sorry, Annabeth said, waving her hand. So why are you afraid of ghosts and skeletons? Lucian's ears turned red once again, ashamed to admit this. It started when I was like 4 years old, so 3 years ago. I wanted to try and see if I could summon skeletons or ghosts and such. I was basically testing out my abilities. When I tried to summon a skeleton, instead of holding onto the ground to lift itself up, the closest thing it grabbed was my leg. It started pulling on it trying to lift itself, but all it was doing was dragging me down. If it wasn't for my mom being next to me and stopping it on time. Lucian didn't continue and just shuddered at the memory. It was like it was trying to drag me down to its resting place, telling me that that's where I belong, that I shouldn't be in the land of the living and turn into a skeleton alongside it. That same reasons is why I can't stand ghosts. I'm sorry for laughing, Annabeth said, feeling bad for laughing at him, especially since he helped her when she was going through her phobia of spiders. Lucian just sighed and patted her head and brought her closer into a side hug. It's all right, it just means since we know each other's fear we've grown closer. Lucian turned to Annabeth and smiled. Right? Annabeth, seeing his smile, blushed slightly before smiling as well. Right. As they started walking, enjoying the silence between them, they suddenly heard an explosion in the far distance. Lucian and Annabeth looked at each before nodding their heads and running towards they heard the explosion. While running, Lucian summoned his scythe just in case, while Annabeth had a hand on her daggers. When they arrived, they saw 2 older kids rolling on the ground in pain. One of the kids was a boy with short sandy blonde hair, while the other one was a girl who had short black hair wearing a punk rock type of outfit. When Lucian saw them, he instantly knew who they were. They were Luke and Thalia, the son of Hermes and the daughter of Zeus. Thalia Grace. Luke cast Helen. Annabeth stood by Thalia, while Lucian stood by Luke. They both extended their hands to them to help them up. It looks like you guys can use some help getting up. Luke and Thalia both looked up from the ground, still slightly distorted from the explosion, and took our hands as we helped them up. Thanks, Luke said, looking at me, while Thalia did the same with Annabeth. Luke stood close to Thalia as he looked at us with a bit of apprehension, especially looking at our weapons. Meanwhile, Annabeth looked somewhat frightened while looking at Thalia's shield, which had the face of a gorgon right on the center. Can you put your shield away? You're scaring her? Lucian asked while shaking his head. Not before you put away your weapon, Thalia said with narrowed eyes. Fine. Lucian said, turning his scythe into a ring. There, happy? Lucian asked with a raised brow. Thalia nodded her head before turning her shield into the wristband. Lucian then grinned as he said, why don't we first start off with an introduction? Chapter 24, Chapter 24. Third person's Poff. Ever since Annabeth has started training with Lucian, she has gained a bit more confidence in herself. So she was the first one to step up and introduce her. I'm Annabeth Chase, daughter of Athena. Nice to meet you all, Annabeth said, proud of her heritage. So we're mentioning that as well, huh? Luke said with a weary smile and a sigh. Well, I'm Luke cast Helen, son of Hermes, Luke said in a somewhat bitter tone before nodding his head at Lucian and Annabeth as a greeting. Thalia and Lucian looked at each other, waiting for the other to introduce themselves first. But they didn't and waited for the other one to do it. You go first, Thalia said, insisting. No, how could I? Ladies first after all, Lucian said with a smile. They both narrowed their eyes at each other, waiting for each other to start speaking first. But all it ended up doing was annoying Annabeth. Why don't Luke and I introduce you guys, since you guys want to act out? Both Lucian and Thalia ended up nodding their head at the same time. Fine, I'm okay with that, they said in sync, causing both Luke and Annabeth to sigh at their friend's antics. Luke started by motioning to Thalia and said, Thalia Grace, daughter of Zeus. While Annabeth motioned to Lucian Blackheart, son of Hades. Which causes both Thalia's and Luke's eyes to widen in shock. When suddenly, the sky started turning dark and started thundering as if it was angered. Meanwhile, the earth responded in kind. It started to shake and wake as if responding to the sky. Wind started to pick up traction, causing all of their hair and clothes to ruffle. And the shaking of the ground got so large that it caused all of them to be thrown to the ground, landing on their butts. Hades. They heard the sky rumble. The ground split open as they heard a shout responding in kind from in between the cracks. Zeus! Zeus pick! Lucian hearing this sigh, everyone else started shaking in fear. You have broken the oath we have set down, the sky rumbled. Don't act innocent, brother. That brat of yours is clearly older than mine. You have broken the oath first, the voice from underneath the ground roared. The sky once again rumbled in discontent but didn't say anything. Don't you dare do anything to my child, Zeus. You already have taken Maria from me. I won't have you take my son as well. And if anything happens to my boy cause of you, I will hunt that brat of yours to the edge of the universe. Lucian, hearing all this, just lowered his head and put his arms resting on his knees so the others would realize he was smiling with a bit of tears in his eyes. Being an orphan for so long, Lucian forgot what it's like to have a family that cares for him, so hearing his father go so far just to defend and calling him his son and boy really got Lucian emotional. A tear fell unwillingly from his eyes. Lucian quietly wiped his tears as the sky rumbled once again. Are you threatening me, the king, for disobeying the same oath you swore to? Fine, brother, if that's how you want to play, let's do it. I won't personally kill that brat of yours, but I can't say the same for the monsters that pick up on his scent. The ground shook so hard at those words, lava started surfacing. Very well, brother. Oops, it looks like some underworld monsters has escaped and has picked up your daughter's scent. Whatever am I going to do? I hope they don't end up killing her. The sound of thunder reverberated and the sound of thunder hitting the ground was heard almost everywhere. That mistake of yours has until he reaches the camp to live, and you will do the same for mine. Do we have ourselves a deal? Zeus roared, trying to at least give his daughter a way to survive this ordeal they found themselves in. Very well, brother, until they cross the border of the camp. Hades roared back, as this was the only way for Lucian to survive Zeus' wrath. He has seen how Lucian fights, so he's sure his son would be able to survive. The clouds in the sky scoffed before they started turning back to white and dispersing, while the ground rumbled and the lava started flowing back into the cracks before they closed themselves off. There was a long silence between all of them as the other three started shaking in fear that even Annabeth had tears following down her eyes. They all slowly stood up, but they were too stunned to speak. So I'm Lucian. Nice to meet you, Lucian said as he stretched his hands towards Thalia to shake her hand, but Thalia was too afraid to move. Lucian just sighed and plopped himself back onto the ground and sat cross-legged. He summoned his bag before searching through it and found a piece of candy he picked up when Annabeth wanted to try some. He summoned a ball of fire and made it float in front of him, which brought the attention of the other three on him, wondering how he could be so calm and composed and what he was doing. He threw the piece of candy into the flames and put his hands together. Hey teacher, it looks like I won our little bet. When can I start expecting lessons from you? Lucian said in a happy singing tone. The voice of Hecate roared in his head. Are you serious, you brat? After everything that just went down, the first thing you do is pray to me to just say I told you so. Lucian just continued smiling as he nodded his head. Yup, he answered in the same tone. So you saw what happened? Lucian said. Every god in Olympus saw what happened. I had to personally be close by to control the mist so their tantrum would be covered up from the mortal world. I see, Lucian said, nodded his head. Well, anyways, talk to you later. I have some people looking at me weirdly at the moment. Lucian undid his fireball and sat up. So how are you guys feeling? Lucian said as they looked at him with their mouths open. What were you just doing? Luke asked, still shocked. Oh, nothing serious. I was just claiming a bet that I won, Lucian said, waving his hands like what he just did wasn't anything important. Before they could ask anything else, Lucian sighed and approached Annabeth. He grabbed her face and started wiping her tears with his thumb. Don't cry, you look ugly when you cry, Lucian said, looking at her teasingly. But, Annabeth stuttered, trying to say something between her tears. Lucian just scoffed at her. Oh please, you seen how strong I am? Do you truly believe I would be killed? Your underestimation of me wounds my little black heart. Get it, Lucian said with a teasing smirk, trying to cheer her up. Which kinda worked as she started laughing through her tears. Just what is going on? Thalia yelled, still looking frightened and scared. Chapter 25. Third person's Poff. Lucian just sighed when he heard Thalia's question. So basically there is a pact or oath, whatever you want to call it, between the three big gods of Olympus, Zeus, Poseidon, and my dad Hades. It was about not fathering any more children, which as you can clearly see didn't work out since we're here. I see, Luke said as he put on a pondering expression. That's why they each want to kill you, since your existence is a sign that they both broke the oath. Lucian nodded his head. It's better if we stick together. Although we would attract more monsters together, we have a better chance of surviving if we fight together. Luke and Annabeth nodded their head, while Thalia just narrowed her eyes. Why should we do that? We are only in this mess because of you. If your father hadn't threatened mine, this wouldn't have happened. Lucian looked at her like she was the biggest idiot in the world. Annabeth went and reached for her daggers and looked at Thalia with a warning look, while Luke reached for his dagger, which he recently received as a parting gift. Are you retarded? Lucian asked in a cold voice, taking Annabeth by surprise, as she had never heard Lucian speak in that tone of voice before. Even Luke and Thalia were taken by surprise. Thalia looked offended and looked at Lucian angrily. What did you just call me, you little punk? Lucian stood up from the ground and started dusting himself off. We are in this mess in the first place because of your father. He broke the oath first. He couldn't keep it in his pants and hid you. So when my dad called him out for it, he decided to be petty and is now trying to kill me. And so since he's trying to kill me, my dad is trying to kill you as a counter. So don't try to blame this on me. If you want to put the blame on someone, blame it on your father. Lucian said, standing face to face with Thalia. She clenched fist and gritted her teeth, but before she could do anything, Luke and Annabeth stood in between the both of us and tried to defuse the situation. He's right, you know. It's not right to blame him. The one to blame are the gods. He's a victim much like you and the rest of us are, Luke said to Thalia, trying to calm her down. What did you call me? Lucian said, narrowing his eyes at Luke. Luke turned towards Lucian and nodded his head. I said you're a victim, just like the rest of us. Don't you see how the gods are only playing with our lives like they're disposable? Don't call me that. I hate it. Don't make it sound like we are helpless and are being taken advantage of, since we are not. Maybe for you, yes, since you're weak, but don't put me in the same category as you. I'm nobody's victim except my own. The only reason I said that it's best to stick together is because you guys need help and I was trying to be that help. Without it you guys won't make it far, Lucian said, stepping away from Annabeth. Which caused her to sigh at how Lucian has been acting recently, although she finds it that it's the right thing to do. Thalia didn't say anything and ran towards Lucian with her fist cocked back ready to punch him, but Lucian ducks under it and punches her in the liver, causing her to drop to the ground in pain. Thalia! Luke yelled and withdrew his dagger and ran towards Lucian, ready to attack him and protect Thalia. Luke swung his dagger, but he leaned back, making it miss. Lucian stepped on Luke's foot to hold him in place, which made Luke swing his dagger much faster, making Lucian start to concentrate. He started moving his body, dodging the dagger without moving his foot, making the dagger miss. Lucian punched Luke in the stomach, dodge, and punched him again on the rib, making him grimace in pain. Lucian let go of his foot and dodged the dagger that came overhead. Lucian moved his body and positioned himself right underneath Luke's outstretched arm as he did an overhead slash, taking a hold of it. Lucian used Luke's momentum against him and threw him over his shoulder. But Luke recovered mid-air and landed with both feet on the ground. He twisted himself back to face Lucian and stretched out his dagger, swinging it, trying to cut him. When Lucian saw the dagger coming, he leaned back once again, but Luke tried to take advantage of that and tried to reach him. Lucian blocked Luke's wrist with his forearm and grabbed his outstretched arm with his other hand, pulling him off balance. Lucian stuck out his foot, making Luke trip and fall face first into the ground. Lucian quickly stepped on Luke's hand, making him scream in pain and release the dagger, which Lucian quickly took a hold of. He twisted Luke's arm behind his back and pressed his knee on top of it while pressing Luke's dagger by his throat. You're only the victim if you call yourself the victim. I call myself a survivor and fighter living in this world full of gods and monsters. If you want to blame them for your suffering, then do it. I couldn't care less, but don't bring me down to your level. Do I make myself clear? Luke reluctantly nodded his head with gritted teeth, making Lucian nod his head in return. He released Luke and gave him his dagger back. Annabeth, who was watching everything, looked at Lucian in admiration. He didn't use any of his abilities in that fight, just his fighting skills. Amazing, she whispered. Thalia, who was standing up while holding his side, looked at Annabeth in surprise. That's right, he's the son of Hades. He didn't summon anything to defeat Luke, just his martial arts. Just how strong is he? Thalia then smiled to herself slightly. You're only the victim if you call yourself the victim. I guess he's right about that, Thalia whispered to herself. She sighed and walked up to Lucian and bowed her head slightly while closing her eyes. I'm sorry for blaming you, she said sincerely. Which took both Lucian and Luke by surprise. I was looking for someone to blame for all this. I know it wasn't right. I was scared and took out my anger on you, which wasn't right, and I'm sorry for it. Lucian let out a sigh as he nodded his head. I can see why you would be scared, so I forgive you, and so I'm sorry for calling you retarded. Thalia let out a sigh of relief and smiled, which caused Annabeth, Luke, and Lucian to smile as well. Lucian then nodded his head and stretched out his hand to Thalia with a cheeky grin. Let's introduce ourselves and start over. I'm Lucian Blackheart, the son of Hades. It's nice to meet you. Thalia chuckled and shook his hand. Thalia Grace, daughter of Zeus, it's nice to meet you as well. Chapter 26. Chapter 26. Third person's Poff. Seeing them shake hands and make amends, Luke sighed, seeing that, which caused him to wince and hold his rib in pain. Lucian, seeing this, willed his shadow and summoned his backpack, which took both Luke and Thalia by surprise. He searched through his bag and found 2 potions before throwing them at both of them. For you guys. They both caught it and looked at it with confusion, to which Annabeth took among herself to explain. It's a healing potion, which Lucian made by himself, Annabeth said proudly, as if it was her own. It works wonders, and I saw the way he makes them. It's pretty good too. Luke and Thalia looked at each before shrugging their shoulders and uncapping the bottle, which they proceeded to carefully take a sip of before downing it completely. They looked at Lucian weirdly after drinking it. Is that Kool-Aid? To which Lucian nodded proudly at that. Let me tell you, I would never make someone drink something I give them knowing it tastes disgusting, Lucian said as an inside joke to himself. Luke and Thalia just looked at Lucian once again, weirdly thinking that the little kid that just beat them up fed them Kool-Aid, thinking it was a healing potion. They didn't know what to say, when suddenly they felt their wounds start to heal. But as it heals, they start to feel a slight sensation of being tired. It's a side effect since it's using your own energy to fasten your healing process. Lucian explained, making them look at him in wonder. Just how many more secrets is he hiding? They both thought at the same time. Where do we go from here? Annabeth asked, looking at everyone. Well, where we always go, north, and see where the wind takes us, Lucian said, to which Annabeth just kicked him on the shin, making Lucian start hopping on one leg. Ouch, what was that for? Lucian asked, holding his shin. For being stupid. What do you mean where the wind takes us? The winds are currently against you, so if they'll take you anywhere is death. It was such a figure of speech. You didn't have to hit me. Lucian said, flicking her head. Ouch, Annabeth said while holding her forehead, which she followed up by punching Lucian in the arm, which prompted him to step on her foot. Annabeth growled at Lucian, ready to try and bite him, but Luke just shook his head. He's right, the most logical choice is to go north. Why? Annabeth asked, looking between Luke and Thalia. I know someone that could help us get there. Luke said with a reluctant sigh. He must be pretty worried about Thalia if we're already making way towards his mom's house, Lucian thought to himself. But before they could get a move on, they heard a loud shrieking sound coming from above. They all looked up and saw a herd of griffin coming towards their direction, causing Lucian to sigh. Great, we haven't even left and we're already being attacked. That can't be good. Lucian turned his ring into a chain scythe and started spinning it, preparing for a fight. Thalia takes out her shield and spear, while Luke and Annabeth take their daggers. The first griffin stretched out its long talons and aimed them straight down towards Lucian. Lucian didn't flinch and sent his spinning blade forward. The griffin tried to dodge, but Lucian pulled the chain to the side, causing the blade to turn and hit the griffin right on the stomach, causing it to fall right out of the sky. The griffins all started swooping down, trying to kill the group of demigods. As one gained towards Annabeth with its beak ready to attack her, she blocked it with the side of her dagger before lodging the other right on its eyes, hitting their brain. Thalia blocked her griffin opponent with her shield, intimidating it. She charged her spear with electricity before stabbing it right through its checks, killing it and turning it into dust. While Luke used his superior speed to dodge the beak and slash his dagger underneath the griffin's throat. Arise, Lucian said, making the 4 griffin they killed turn into shadow soldiers and rise alongside his own army in his shadow. Lucian had a total of 227 shadow soldiers, including the 4 griffins, minus the 156 spiders he killed due to not trying to trigger Annabeth's phobia, making it a total of 71. The 5 Laestrygonians each jumped, grabbing a griffin from the sky, causing them start wrestling each other. The griffin would to rip them apart with beaks and claws, but they reconstructed themselves and held to their feather neck before joining their arms and squeezed their neck, causing the griffins to start screeching and thrashing loudly. After a while the sound of their necks popping was heard as they quickly turned to dust. Arise! Lucian shouted once again, gaining another 5 griffins. Thalia and Luke looked at Lucian in shock that he had to scream at them. Don't pay attention to me, pay attention to what's in front of you. They quickly snapped out of it and saw 10 impulsi in front of them, 5 in for the two of them. They were using their ability to manipulate the mist. They turned the mist into ropes and it wrapped around Griffins from every direction, holding it in place. Luke had easy access to its head, killing it in one shot while Thalia just impaled it with her spear. Annabeth, already used to Lucian's abilities, shot her dagger forward, hitting the Griffin on its torso but not killing it, only making it screech in anger and pain. The Griffin swung its lion paw that had its claws extended towards Annabeth. She rolled to the side and shot her other dagger towards its head, impaling the side of its head, killing it in 2 shots. "Arise," Lucian said, once again gaining another 3 Griffins, making it a total of 12 Griffins. They all let out a sigh of relief when it was over as Lucian called his shadows back to where they belong. "Well, let's get moving. We can't wait here all day and just get attacked again," Lucian said as he turned round and walked forward. "Wait, you're not going to explain what just happened?" Thalia asked. "And are we not going to use the Griffins as a mode of transport?" Annabeth asked. Lucian groaned. "I'll explain on the way, and I can't use them since that means we'll be flying through the sky, which is Zeus' domain. It wouldn't be good to fly in his territory." The sky started rumbling in discontent when Lucian mentioned Zeus' name, probably mad at the fact that he ruined one of his plans. Thalia silently let out a sigh of relief and made sure no one was looking, which they weren't. Annabeth nodded her head at the explain. "That makes sense, but why don't you use the giants?" "That, my little friend, is because I didn't think about it," Lucian said as a matter of fact. Annabeth just rolled her eyes and waited for Lucian to summon them so they could continue their journey. Chapter 27, Chapter 27. Third Person's Puff. Lucian, Annabeth, Luke, and Thalia were seen riding on top of their respective shadow griffin each. But instead of flying like they are supposed to, they are running on the ground. Annabeth looked at Lucian like he was the biggest idiot in the world. "Did you really forget griffins walk and run on the ground as well?" "Okay, in my defense, I have never seen a real-life griffin and I just saw all of them in the sky for the first time in my life, so forgive for not immediately thinking they belong on the ground, okay? You are so hopeless," Annabeth said with a sigh while shaking her head. Meanwhile Thalia and Luke look at Lucian in shock and amazing. "How the hell is it fair that you have such an amazing ability? I'm the daughter of Zeus, for crying out loud, and my abilities aren't that strong." Lucian just looked back at Thalia and gave her an arrogant smirk while shrugging his shoulder. "Sounds like a skill issue to me, sucks to suck." A tick mark appeared on Thalia as she guided her griffin to get closer to him. "Come here, you little shit." Lucian started to laugh maniacally, mwahaha, while running around Luke and Annabeth in circles. Luke and Annabeth started chuckling and shaking their heads at their antics. One wouldn't believe they were at each other's throat just a few minutes earlier. Lucian turns to Thalia and answers her previous question. "If I have to take high guess why our abilities vastly different, then it's because your creativity is lacking." Thalia looked at Lucian in confusion while Luke and Annabeth paid close attention. "If I have to take a guess, then you only use your demigod abilities in a straightforward manner. Tell me if I'm wrong, but you mostly charge your spear with electricity and then stab it forward, to either make it easier for penetration or to shoot electricity at someone." Lucian looks at Thalia and waits to see if he would correct him. "When I'm angry, a small lightning storm generates on top of me," Thalia said, a bit embarrassed while trying to appear more powerful. "And that's only when you're angry, right? And if I have to make another guess, you just send electricity down on your opponents and hope it's enough to kill them, right?" Thalia slowly nodded her head. "So like I said, you aren't creative enough with your powers. Holy underworld. Have you ever thought of wrapping yourself in your electricity, making yourself as fast as lightning? How about the little storm? Why is it only when you're angry? Have you tried to summon it by yourself? Is it only thunderstorms, or is it more related to your father's abilities to control the weather? And if it's the latter, why would you only stick to thunderstorms? There are multiple types of weather out there that are equally as powerful. For example, a drought is the result of dry weather. Could you use it to dry the moisture of people, monsters, and leave them dehydrated until they die of thirst? How about a blizzard? You could generate cold weather and give someone hypothermia and make it so they freeze to death. Literally, the possibilities are endless. You are just not being creative enough." Lucian finishes his rant and catches his breath. After a while he notices that nobody was saying a thing and were just looking at him with their mouths hanging wide open. Lucian's ears started turning slightly red when he realized, "Sorry, I didn't mean to go on a rant. It's just that Thalia has a lot of potential to be one of the most powerful demigods out there but isn't being smart about it." However, before anyone had the chance to say anything, they heard the sound of multiple metal sounds clicking against the ground in front of them, which was followed by loud, multiple barks behind them. When Lucien sighed as he realized what was happening, he heard the sound of multiple wings flapping at each side, causing his lips to start twitching slightly. Okay, quick, do we make a fast run for it and just try to dodge everything, or do we get off and fight the wave of monsters coming in our direction? Lucien asked quickly. It's best if we fight them head on instead of just running away. If we have to fight while on the griffins, our combat abilities would be lowered since we don't have any experience doing cavalry battles, Luke responded immediately. Thalia and Annabeth nodded their head in agreement. They all dismounted the griffins and stood back to back against each other. Annabeth took out both her daggers from her side. Thalia turned her canister into a spear and said, Aegis turning her bracelet into a shield, while Luke just took out his dagger with a fist raised. I'll summon my other shadows to help, but be careful, since if they get too injured all at the same time I won't be able to maintain them for battle and help you guys out, Lucien quickly explained, before turning his ring into a bow. They all nodded their heads and waited for the monsters to come and surround in the middle of an open grass field. Lucien summoned all the shadows he owned and had them stand in a circle protecting them. Lucien currently had 1 raven, 5 layers Draconian's giant, 20 Stymphalian birds, 30 lamias, 1 large boar, 156 spiders, 10 impausi, and 12 griffins. Which Lucien summoned except the spiders, as they would have just done more harm than good. In front of Lucien and the rest, a group of cultures bull came charging up to them. They were bronze metal bulls with the ability to breathe fire, which was plain obvious due to the smoke coming out of their nostrils. From back the way Lucien and the others came from, hellhounds were making their ways running towards them. And from the sky, harpies were slowly approaching them with large screeching noises. Lucien thought of different ways this could go and of different possibilities in the span of a few seconds. He turned his bow into a sword and passed it on to Luke, hearing quickly, take this, I noticed how uncomfortable you were with a dagger earlier. Thanks, but what about you? Luke asked while putting away his dagger and taking it. Lucien just smirked as his shadow started moving like it was alive, growing tendrils. Don't worry, like I previously showed you, I don't need a weapon to be classified powerful. And soon they were quickly surrounded from all sides with no way to escape but to fight. Chapter 28. Chapter 28. Third person's Poff. Lucien shot his tendrils of shadow into the sky, grabbing around 6 harpies from the air and willing the tendrils to slam them down on the ground. With an unwilling screech they bounced from the ground with a large thud and quickly turned to dust, causing them to later reform in Tartarus. Lucien proceeded to then summoned earth spikes from the ground and shot them in the air, taking down 8 more harpies. Meanwhile Luke, who now had a sword in his hands, ran towards the massive hellhounds that were the size of a bear. One of them jumped at him, ready to tear one of his limb off with its teeth, but Luke simply sidestepped while swinging his sword to the side, decapitating it, turning it into dust and ashes. Unexpectedly a hellhound suddenly appeared behind him as it used shadow travel to appear behind him. Behind you, Luke. Lucien called out, sensing the use of shadow travel. Luke didn't stop to think about it before spinning on his heels and slashing the hellhound across its chest, turning it into dust as well. Normally if one isn't from the underworld or from something of similar nature related to it, then it would have been impossible to wield a Stygian steel weapon. But since it is blood-bounded weapon and Lucien gave permission for Luke to wield it, he's able to use it but isn't able to absorb the essence of the monsters he kills into the sword. Luke ducked his head when he saw his shadow move slightly and a hellhound suddenly appear over him as it jumped from his shadow. Luke thrusted his sword upwards, skewering the hellhound's chest. When it turned into dust, more hellhound jumped from each direction surrounding him, trying to maim him. Luke tried spinning with the blade, trying to get each of them, but only ended up cutting and killing 3 of them before the last one swung its claw across his back, making him grunt in pain. He didn't turn around and just thrusted his sword backwards, impaling it in the head. And while that was happening, Lucien's shadows were all over the place. The 5 layers Draconian's giants alongside the impausi were ahead, taking down any hellhounds they could, but some still managed to escape them using shadow travel and go towards Luke's direction. Meanwhile the 20 Stymphalian birds were in the air, helping Lucien take down the harpies from the sky. Some used their friends as decoys in front of them and swooped down towards Lucien, managing to scratch him on his arms and legs. And while that was going on, Annabeth and Thalia were busy fighting the fire-breathing bulls. Thalia ended up using her shield to block the bull's charge but ended up being pushed back due to its force, and as it opened its mouth to use its inborn flamethrower, she thrusted her electricity-charged spear inside it, destroying their core. The lamias would then wrap their tails around Thalia and pull her away from the explosions. Some of the lamias would wrap themselves around the bulls and pry their mouth open, which gave Annabeth the chance to throw her daggers inside, also destroying the cause. One of the bulls went charging around the field, scorching some of the grass while also breathing fire, destroying some of the lamia's shadows. It then headed straight for Thalia. Due to its still breathing fire, Thalia had to protect herself with her shield. The bull took that opportunity to ram its head, sending Thalia flying crashing into ground with a grimace. "Thalia, switch with me," Lucian yelled out. Although confused and slightly frustrated, she obliged. Thalia quickly got up and they both ran towards each and swapped opponents. It was now Thalia fighting the harpies while Lucian went towards the bulls. The harpies were less hostile and weary of Thalia due to her status as Zeus' daughter and Aegis shield intimidating them. But Thalia didn't care for their feelings at the moment. She pointed her spear into the air and released a volt of electricity, in which she started using it as a whip, twirling it around, vaporizing any harpies it made contact with. As for Lucian, as soon as he came close enough to the bulls, he spread his arms slightly and made a grasping motion. He proceeded to then slowly bring his two fists together, causing two bulls that were charging at him and Annabeth to change directions and start tilting their horn towards each other. The bulls tried to move and get away from each other and whatever was controlling them, but they just ended crashing into one another, causing their horns to pierce the head of other. They quickly powered down, causing them to crash into the ground with sparks coming off them. Lucian smirked, seeing that. He previously failed to realize that the bronze bull were made from celestial bronze, a very rare metal he has the ability to control. When suddenly a dagger flew right past the side of his head, causing his eyes to widen, before hearing something being impaled, followed by a loud screech right behind him. He turned round and saw a harpy turn to dust. He turned back towards Annabeth, who was smirking in his direction. "Now you owe me one." Lucian didn't say anything and just made an uppercut motion with his fist. Annabeth was at first confused before she heard sound of an impact. She quickly turned around and looked behind her. She saw a pillar coming from the ground, hitting a bull that was too close for confront under its head, sending it flying back, making it land on its back. Lucian then made a swiping up motion, and from the center of the bull's stomach a spear made of multiple jewels and gold pierced through right underneath it, destroying its core. Lucian returned her smirk with one of his own, "And now we're even." Seeing that they killed all the bulls, Lucian turned towards Annabeth. "Prepare to catch me." "What?" "Arise!" Lucian yelled. He felt his already dwindling amount of magic to suddenly plummet, causing him to fall face first with sweat running down from his forehead. Annabeth quickly caught Lucian with a panicked expression and put his arm over her shoulder, lifting him up, making her lean on her. "What just happened?" Annabeth asked, never seen Lucian look so exhausted before. Lucian started chuckling. "I just decided to turn the tide of the battle in our favor." In front of them, multiple shadow soldiers started rising from the ashes they left behind and started helping the other shadow soldier bring down the remaining monsters. Little by little, Lucian's forces started overpowering their opponents. Luke and Thalia stopped what they were doing since they didn't have to fight anymore and watched in shock as Lucian's shadows completely eliminated the leftover harpies and hellhound, leaving the battlefield with only Lucian's shadows and the ashes and dust of what remained of the monsters. Chapter 29. Third person's POF. Lucian, Annabeth, Thalia, and Luke were seen sitting around a campfire with an exhausted look over their faces. With bandages wrapped around some parts of their bodies, they have already drunk all the healing potions available, but it wasn't enough. Even if they did have more, they would have been too tired for it to have been beneficial. "Sorry," Lucian said while looking at Luke's bandaged hand with a hint of guilt in his eyes. Luke just shook his head. "Don't worry about it. It's thanks to it that I was able to fight and only leave with a few claw marks." "You sure are forgetful, huh?" Annabeth said while laying on her back looking at the stars. "It's not my fault I'm so smart, okay?" Lucian retorted. "What? Isn't it supposed to me that you're dumb since you're so forgetful?" Thalia asked confusedly while feeding Luke a piece of meat since he couldn't use his hands at the moment. Lucian looks at Thalia with a smug expression. "That's where you're wrong. I have so many ideas and smart thoughts that useless information escapes my head and doesn't have storage for it. Yeah, like that only people related to the underworld are allowed to wield Stygian steel weapons." "Wow, such useless knowledge," Annabeth scoffed with a playful expression. "It's really not that bad, guys. All it did was burn my hands. One thing I notice is that we demigods heal faster, so it should be gone by morning at the earliest, or in 2 days at most," Luke said in between bites, looking at his hands. Annabeth turns and looks at Lucian. "So how many more shadowy thingies did you get overall?" 120 harpies and 140 hellhounds. And although the bulls can't become my shadows, they still left me a little gift. I was able to use what remained of their bodies and turn it into celestial bronze ingots, which I should be able to use to make Luke a temporary sword." "Thanks man," Luke said, looking at Lucian gratefully. "Don't thank me yet, thank me when it's done." Luke just smiled and nodded his head. Thalia then looked over everyone. "So what are we going to do for the night watch? We need to figure out the order." "There's actually no need. I'll just leave some of my shadow birds to stay and watch our surroundings." Lucian willing Bartholomew to come out from his shadow. It flew around for a bit before perching itself on his shoulder. "Won't they simply disappear if you fall asleep or something and leave us defenseless?" Thalia asked with a questioning look, as if deciding whether it's a good idea to leave her back open to a bird. "Already tried it, don't worry," Lucian said, reassuring her, which she responded with a nod. Lucian summoned most of his air-related shadows and had them stay out and keep watch. Lucian summoned his bag and used it as a pillow and pulled out a sweater and used it as a blanket. Unluckily for them, it was the winter, so they were cold. Lucian laid his head on his bag and closed his eyes and fell asleep. 1 month later. "We're close by, just a few feet away," Luke shouted as his lips were pale blue and his teeth were chattering while he was shivering due to the giant snowstorm and blizzard that descended upon them. "Don't you dare close your eyes, Annabeth," Lucian shouted with gritted teeth, while shivering as well, as he saw her slowly closing her eyes on top of her griffin. Lucian clicked his tongue and willed his griffin to approach hers. He jumped from his ride and landed behind Annabeth, where he proceeded to wrap his arms around her, sharing his body heat. "If this was a regular blizzard, I would have just used my magic to warm us all up, but it's clearly not. I'll get him back for this." Lucian thought of doing anything possible, even trying to make the griffins run faster. Which wasn't a very good idea, as he felt like his skin was about to peel off if it went any faster. After a few minutes they all arrived at the ridge. They looked down to the other side and there it was, a white colonial-style house. In other words, May Castellan's house, Luke's home. Luke gritted his teeth. He doesn't know if it's because of the cold weather or his emotions and feelings upon seeing his home, the place he ran away from. "We're here, come on," Luke shouted and made his griffin go forward, making the others follow close behind. A brilliant golden flash illuminated through the woods, causing everyone to wince, which was followed by the booming voice of a man. "Luke, you shouldn't have come home." "Hermes. You think if I had a choice I would have decided to come here? This is the only place where I knew you at least noticed that I came by, and the only place where my friends can stay for a bit." Luke didn't say anything else and just continued riding the griffin to the front door of the white colonial house. He got off griffin, which was followed by everyone else. Lucian went and carried Annabeth in a princess carry close behind Luke. While Thalia looked at Luke worriedly, since he hasn't been acting the same since they started getting closer to this place. Luke went towards the front door and started knocking after a bit of hesitation. An old woman who was as thin as a scarecrow, her grey-white sticking out like tufts all over her head, opened the door. "May Castellan." May gasped in surprise when she saw Luke. "Luke. My baby, you must be freezing cold in this weather. Quickly come in and invite your friends inside. I told you playing in the cold isn't good for your health. Luckily I have a fireplace set up." Luke didn't respond and just looked down on the ground as he was unable to look his mother in the eyes. Chapter 30. Third person's Poff. Annabeth was shivering, laying her head on Lucian's lap with a blanket over her. Lucian was running his finger through her hair while simultaneously using his magic, which he was now able to use to warm her up even further. Meanwhile, Luke and Hermes were seen sitting down on a couch slightly away from everyone, but not that far, as Lucian, who was close by, was able to hear them. "So you finally decided to show yourself, huh? Why now? Why not in all those years where I prayed to you to come and take me away? You didn't do anything and just left me with her," Luke said, pointing a finger towards his mother, still unable to even look at her. Hermes' face hardened slightly. "Don't disrespect her, she's still your mother. She did the best that she could. As for me, I could not interfere with your path. The children of the gods must find their own path, their own ways of doing things." "Yeah, okay, so it was for my own good that I grew up in the streets, fending for myself, fighting monsters, fighting to just live another day." Luke clenched his fist with every word that came out of his mouth. "You are my son. I knew you were talented. I knew that you would be fine on your own, when I was just a baby. I'm not a god. For once, you could have just said something. You could have helped when." Luke stopped himself, noticing that his friends were staring at him. He lowered his voice to the point that only Hermes was able to hear. "You could have helped me when she was having one of her fits, shaking me, saying crazy things about my fate. When I used to hide in the closet so she wouldn't find me with those glowing eyes. Did you even care that I was scared? Luke's voice started shaking the more he spoke. Did you even know when it was that I ran away? Luke turned his head as he couldn't even look at his father and saw Thalia waving at him to look. She tilted the cup and mouthed, "She gave me hot water saying it's hot chocolate." "What the fuck?" Luke, Hermes called out, "I care about you very much, but gods must interfere directly in mortal affairs. It's one of the most ancient laws. Especially when your destiny." Hermes' voice trails off and his face hardens once again as if he remembered something he wishes to forget. "What?" Luke asked. "What about my destiny?" "You really shouldn't have come here," Hermes mutters, but before he could say anything Luke gets a confused look on his face. "Wait, why did I want to come here? Why did I immediately think of this place and make my decision to come here when I have been avoiding this place?" Luke muttered to himself. "What?" Hermes asked, narrowing his eyes. "What are you talking about?" Upon hearing his further, Luke's face grimaced in annoyance. "Don't act like a caring father now. After all these years of neglect, my few months have been hectic. I'll probably remember in a while, but that doesn't give you the right to come in and start caring about me." Hearing this, Hermes just sighed. "It must have been a stressful journey." "You might have been feeling homesick," Hermes said, trying to justify Luke's strange behavior, but all it ended up doing was angering Luke further. This is the last place Luke would consider a home. Before Luke could say anything else, Hermes continued where he left off. "You coming here only upsets both of you. You really should have come, but it also helps me realize that you are too old to be on the run without help. I'll speak with Karen at Camp Half-Blood and ask him to send a setter to collect all of you. Forget about it for now. Just tell me what you were going to say about my destiny." Hermes' shoes and hat then started to flutter slightly as if agitated and trying to memorize all of Luke's features. "My son," Hermes softly called out, "I am the god of travelers and roads. If I know anything, it's that you must walk your own path, even if it tears my heart." "You don't love me," Luke stated as if it was a fact. "I promise, Luke, I do love you. I love you dearly. Go to camp, get there safely. I will see that you get a quest soon. Perhaps you can defeat the Hydra or steal an apple of Hesperides. You will get to be a great and brave hero before." "Before what?" Luke said, his expression turning angrier by the second. "What did my mom see that made her like this? What's going to happen to me? You said that you loved me, right? Then prove it, tell me." Hermes sighed as his expression tightened. "I can't." "Then you don't care," Luke yelled, startling May. Luke. Is that you? Quick, come home. I'm worried about you. It's dangerous outside. Have you returned?" she rambled on. Luke turned to hide his face from his mother so her fit wouldn't be triggered. Tears started filling his eyes. "I'm fine without any of you. I already have a new family. Thalia, Lucian, Annabeth, let's go. We're leaving." "Wait, you can't leave yet." Luke was surprised when he heard his father yelling and reached out his hand, grabbing him. He expected his mother to be the one saying this, not his father. "You can't go, you'll die, all of you will." Thalia, Luke, Lucian, and Annabeth, who was feeling better and staying close to Lucian, all looked at Hermes in surprise. "What are you talking about? And didn't you say that you couldn't intervene in mortal affairs? Why are you stopping us now? Aren't you contradicting yourself?" Luke yelled and pulled his arms away from Hermes, not wanting to be touched by him. Hermes was now looking worried. "What I can't intervene with is your path and fate, as that is only yours to take, but this is different. This isn't only a mortal affair, it's a godly one as well." Hermes then looked at Thalia and Lucian. "My father and uncle are each trying to kill you at any chance they get. If you leave like this, you would all die suffering from their wrath." Hermes then looked Luke in the eyes as he said, "You previously said to prove it to you that I love you, right? So here's my proof." Hermes summoned his divine weapon, his caduceus, and spread out his arms. "I'm alone allowed to give you a temporary one, but I, Hermes, god of travelers and roads, give you all my blessing to reach your destination safely together. Although the journey ahead won't be easy and you will experience a lot of challenges, you will always find the right path that leads you where you need to go." They all felt Hermes' divine power sweep over them, but they didn't feel much different. "There, I have give you my blessings. Now you would have a much better chance of survival." Hermes turned towards Lucian and Thalia and with a sigh said, "Don't worry, I don't blame you two for what's going on. You two were just born at a time that you shouldn't, which isn't fair for either of you. I've done all I could." And with that, Luke walked out without saying anything to his father while the others started following close behind. Lucian looked back towards Hermes and May closed the door behind him. May suddenly held on to Hermes as his eyes glowed a green color. The fates beloved is in our presence. Destinies which were coming have changed paths. Oaths are broken, and a challenge is issued that changes everything. Hermes' eyes widened in shock and horror as he looked at May, whose eyes returned to normal, started crying out of nowhere, "My baby Luke is gone. Where is he? He needed mommy. I bake you some cookies, honey." Chapter 31. Third person's Puff. "Can we go back inside? I'm cold again," Annabeth said while hugging herself and slowly making her way towards Lucien. "Oh right, here you guys go," Lucien said as he ended up taking out sweaters for each of them. Thalia looked at the leather jacket Lucien handed her and said, "No offense, but the last thing I need right now is to wear something made out of cold leather and take off this coat that's barely functional." Lucien rolled his eyes at that. "While inside I was able to finally use my magic since I wasn't in that magic dampening snowstorm, and so while Annabeth was defrosting I used that chance to enchant the sweaters, jacket we mostly wear with an enchantment that provide warmth." They all quickly took off what they were wearing and put on their respective sweaters, making them release a satisfied moan. "Ah Lucien, you are a lifesaver," Thalia said, enjoying the warmth. Annabeth, although already warm, started inching herself closer to Lucien while blushing to herself. Everyone mostly thought that it's due to the lingering effects of the cold, but if Annabeth saw her own face she would know that it was for a different reason. "So what do we do now? Where do we go? Do we just wait?" Thalia asked with her hands inside her pockets. Luke, although wanting to refuse his father's help, looked at everyone around and sighed. "We'll wait for the satyr to arrive. With his help we'll reach Camp Half-Blood faster, which I assume is the camp your dads were talking about, and end this quickly." There was an awkward silence between them before Lucien decided to end it by looking at Luke with a teasing expression, which he caught on and looked at Lucien in confusion. "What?" Lucien put a hand on his throat and coughed to prepare his throat. He used a bit of magic and mimicked Luke's voice perfectly. "I'm fine without any of you. I already have a new family." Lucien voiced then returned to normal and looked at Luke with his teasing expression still on. "So you consider us family, or Luke, you big old softy?" Luke then got embarrassed and turned his head away. "After everything we've been through I would be surprised if you didn't think we grew closer," he mumbled. Annabeth smiled at that and leaned her head against Lucien's arm. "Even after everything we have experienced and coming close to death almost daily, I'm sure that running away is and will be the smartest decision I made." Thalia just blushed and playfully punched Luke in the arm. "Who knew that's what you really felt, huh?" There was a beautiful silence between before Lucien decided that he had enough of the mutty feeling vibe they were all radiating. Lucien pointed his index finger towards his mouth and then made an exaggerated gagging sound, which everyone could tell he was being playful. "You, that was weird. I'm the son of Hades. I'm supposed to be all gloomy and shit. What was with that weird vibe?" Everyone just started chuckling, which Luke was grateful for. After everything that just happened with his father, a laugh between the people who he considers family is the thing he really needed. A few hours later, Lucien and everyone else were seen sitting a few feet away from May's house. Lucien made his shadows go and searched for logs which they used as seats and waited in the cold in front of a campfire for their guide to appear. "You geese didn't have to do this, you know," Luke said with a sigh. "I would have been just fine sucking it up and going back inside and dealing with what needed to be dealt. You guys don't have to deal with this cold for me." All three of them then started shaking their heads in disagreement. "We saw how uncomfortable and uneasy you were when you were inside. A little cold is nothing compared to what you would have felt if we went back inside," Thalia said with a smile. Annabeth and Lucien nodded their heads. Annabeth then just shrugged her shoulders. "Plus with Lucien's enchantments it's not too bad. Just like how you consider us family, we consider you family as well. If something makes you uncomfortable there's no way we would force you to go." Everyone turned towards Lucien and waited for him to say something, but he just looked at them with a raised brow. "What? Oh, you want me to say something? Well, I can survive just about anywhere. The cold never bothered me anyways, so you good bro." Luke just smiled at that. Between guy friends they don't need to say much to express how they feel. Luke immediately understood what Lucien wanted to convey and smiled. While the girls weren't the same, Annabeth nudged Lucien on the ribs and gave him an "seriously? That's all? Look." Meanwhile Thalia just rolled her eyes. However, before they could say anything or make new conversations, a few feet away from the woods they heard the sound of what appeared to be a goat coming down a mountain, its hooves making contact against the rocks as it came down. A satyr came down from the ridge to the side and stood in front of them nervously. "Buahen, nice to meet you everyone. My name is Grover Underwood. As I'm assigned as your protector I'm supposed to help you get to Camp Half-Blood safely." Grover introduced himself nervously. Grover Underwood, AN, you'll put the pictures, any Grover pic I put just gets shadow banned, so enjoy yourself. Everyone then started to introduce themselves, starting from youngest to oldest: Annabeth, Lucian, Thalia, and Luke. Lucian looked around trying to see if they sent anyone else. But when he saw that he didn't, he turned towards Grover and asked, "Hey, do you mind if I ask you a question, and just know I'm not trying to be rude or anything, but isn't there nobody else?" Grover's expression turned slightly sad, but before Grover can misunderstand the situation, Lucian continues. "Can you let me explain why I asked that?" Grover, although slightly downcasted at Lucian's reaction to seeing him, he nodded his head. "Looking at you, I can guess that in your race you would be considered very young, right?" Grover nodded his head. "So they sent someone so young to bring back 2 demigods of the big 3, which would attract a lot of monsters. Which is why I asked if they sent someone else. Sending some so young for such a dangerous mission is just stupid. Whoever sent you must hate you for some reason." "Boo, it can't be that bad, right?" Grover asked, feeling even more nervous than before he started. Everyone just started looking at Grover with pity, which just made Grover more nervous. "Right? AN, quick question in poll. Do you mind if I create some original monsters for Greek mythology to introduce to the story? Yes. Or no. One of the things I'm really struggling with in this fic is the monsters they encounter. I just can't find anything that could be interesting.